Okay, so today we're going to be talking about virtual production, but especially in-camera visual effects workflows. Virtual production is very broad, so we're kind of just doing a bit of a deep dive into this one little slice today. So in this presentation, we will focus on 3 case studies that represent successful applications for in-camera visual effects. Each of these projects broke away from structured methods that were established and marketed in 2019. And instead of embracing custom, and instead of kind of working in these structured ways that were pitched to all of us, they instead embraced custom engineering and agile workflows in order to serve the story and the creator's vision by adapting the virtual production department to the director's process itself. So I will highlight some key learnings from Camille and Black Adam to start that really influenced my approach for the in-camera visual effects on Amazon Studios' Fallout. So between 2007 and 2024, virtual production has evolved from being accessible to just large budget films and projects to now being more of a widely adopted filmmaking approach. And off this timeline, for the purpose of this presentation, it's important to kind of extract 2 different films, but they came out in the same year. 2019, the release of Lion King and The Mandalorian marked a pivotal moment in virtual production in general, because it demonstrated ways to integrate real-time workflows in a special way. It was the same studio, Disney, and the same director, Jon Favreau, but they used all the techniques in the pool of virtual production to create a different recipe for each project. And to go into detail about that a little bit, The Lion King used real-time virtual production pipeline for a 100% computer-generated output, where the filmmakers could treat that process like making a live-action film. While The Mandalorian that year came out as an episodic series, which used in-camera visual effects by displaying CG set extensions on LED walls during live-action filmmaking, and brought digital visual effects into that live-action filmmaking process. So with these 2 very well-rounded case studies, you got to see, I'm sorry, I'm reading this a little bit, but you got to see the full kind of framework of what the promise of virtual production could be, especially that non-destructive asset pipeline. And while both projects laid the groundwork for an idealized production pipeline for virtual production, they followed very structured approaches established by Jon Favreau with very fixed creative restraints. So fast forwarding to the release of Fallout in 2024, Fallout marks a significant milestone in the evolution of this field. And it's the first episodic series to fully integrate analog film workflows with LED wall technology throughout its entire production, capturing final imagery on film. So this achievement was supported by an independently functioning virtual production department that adapted seamlessly to the director's production strategy, instead of some of these methods pitched in 2019. Having previously collaborated with Jonathan Nolan on single episodes of later seasons of Westworld, our Magnopus team had gained insight into his directing style, which required a more agile, engineering-focused approach. So Fallout became the first series in history to apply these agile techniques comprehensively in a manner that could be replicated to serve the needs of a wide range of creators, and in analog. So the case studies in today's presentation point to a new era of in-camera visual effects that allow filmmakers to retain flexibility of live-action shooting while taking full advantage of real-time technology for in-camera visual effects. Represented on this slide are just basic techniques or ingredients for several types of virtual production workflows. So depending on what techniques you use and how you combine them, you can achieve different results, kind of like the Lion King Mandalorian scenario. Each project requires a different recipe to achieve a desired outcome. As a virtual production supervisor, I'm part of the development process. I'm helping break down scripts to determine whether virtual production techniques are essential to a project. So here are some basic considerations I like to start with when I break down a script and I'm figuring out what that recipe is going to be. First question, are you making a mostly CG project like as your final output, like The Lion King, for example? Are you making a mostly photographed project that might include in-camera visual effects or visual effects? Or are you kind of making something that's sort of outside of that and you just want to use bits and pieces of these techniques like visualization, virtual scouting, or like maybe simulcam that don't need such a complex process? Regardless, when planning a project, the decision to use virtual production techniques should be guided by creative needs, budget, and logistical considerations. And open communication with all stakeholders ensures that the chosen approach enhances the project without compromising the integrity of the creative process. So the case studies I've selected intentionally cover these potential scenarios and reflect budgets that range from micro budget all the way to like large tentpole. The short film Camille was produced with a production budget under $15,000 and was inspired by Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven and the paintings by Andrew Wyeth. The film tells the story of Camille and her farmhand as they seek refuge from a looming storm. The director, myself in this scenario, also VP Soup, aimed to demonstrate the naturalistic imagery and Verite-style camera work could be achieved using LED workflows on a limited budget with final supporting visual effects captured in camera. And in 2021, when I wrote and shot this, there weren't a lot of case studies like that out there. But the key reasons why we decided to use LED wall workflows were, one, not having the time or budget to travel crew to a real location. There are no lush fields in LA. It's like desert out here. We did not have the budget or permits to have fire crew and safety to execute the fire scene that we wanted to try out. And we did not have, we needed the ability to like art direct extreme weather, but like on our talent schedule. So it just sort of seemed to make sense to use these workflows. So as you can see, we had access to a small stage space with low ceilings, probably as high as like this brown line up here. The LED wall was like 31 feet long, so maybe the size of the stage. But as you can see in the photo, the 1.9 millimeter pixel pitch allowed us to like maximize that 25-foot area in front of the wall a little bit more, focusing about 6 feet off of the wall. So as a director or like a VP Soup, you're kind of always like trying to figure out what's the stage, like what are the parameters that I have to work within to like move the scene forward. So creating diagrams like this for myself really helped me know how to stage actors and cameras effectively. We had to get creative about tools to use for like lighting, and then even the setups. We had to figure out with limited amount of people how we could like dress the sets and then remove the sets quickly. We only had 2 days to shoot. We were allowed to have a few test days, and these are images from the final project, but we were able to test some of these workflows in advance. And I believe every project, no matter what budget, needs to have these days. Here's just another cool visual of our barn set piece, and it should show how you can expand a small space and get a totally different visual feel by just adding something simple like a 3-wall set piece. This is also a great example of some final imagery from that particular scene using the LED wall as our key source light. In our fire scene, referencing Days of Heaven very, very literally, this is also a scenario where we used the LED wall as a key light. Although we had spent time developing fire and these effects in Unreal Engine, in a 1 or 2 week period, you're not going to get the visual quality that you need or the optimization. So I pivoted into using 2D 4K plates that could just be played back. But with the addition of foreground and our lighting choices, it made the scene kind of come together. This project I've already written a paper on that was published in SMPTE's Motion Imaging Journal, May 2023, and presented at Cannes Film Festival. So after this, if you want to dive deep into the technical processes, it's all mapped out, and I can share that with you. But moving into Black Adam, this is a fun one. Not very popular, but I think from having worked on it perspective is like one of the best experiences of my life. It presented a unique challenge. And this represents like big budget film, very visual effects heavy, and a case study where virtual production and in-camera visual effects really simplified some processes that could have been way more complex. But we simplified for the VP suit. So one of the main uses of in-camera visual effects for this were in many ways interactive lighting, but these workflows also allowed for a centralized editing pipeline, which was incredibly useful for this type of project. And as you can imagine, in this world, Black Adam is sort of like a godlike figure, and part of the story in his world, he never walks, he flies, he hovers. So this is like lots of interesting challenges for the suit. And the film actually, even though it is mostly, I would call it like a CG output kind of final project, it required over 100 days of physical production between Georgia and Los Angeles. So its non-destructive asset pipeline from pre-production through post was unique for this type of project when it was in development from 2019 through 2021. But it really streamlined everything in post-visual effects. So they had taken the essence and the structure that films like A Lion King or Mandalorian proposed and worked it into a much more organic style with the director. The director came from an editing background, and so these practices spoke to him, and this combination of building assets with all 5 visual effects facilities that were providing our real-time content and our post-rendered content meant that they could not only build assets continuously from pre-production through post, but we could centralize our visualization and editorial from prep, taking edited sequences, and then having a previs editor on set so that as we were shooting live, footage from the video feed would go into, the edit pretty much immediately, and we could match action and sequences. So it became this very hyper efficient workflow. The first, so I guess at the end of this, I was trying to make the point that there were actually, in this project, 3 totally different in-camera visual effects, like LED wall workflows that I was managing simultaneously between Los Angeles and Georgia. The first was in Georgia at Trilith. It was a 50-foot diameter process stage that used Disguise to play back 2D pre-rendered CG content and practically photographed plates. This was a custom stage built mostly for wire work and vehicle process shots. And just to kind of mention, to avoid the uncanny valley often associated with digital characters, the production relied heavily on these LED walls, especially volumetric capture techniques in combination with them, to get accurate interactive lighting and really high quality photoreal performances from the actors. It's like just in visual effects in general, if you're a VFX supervisor, constructing close-ups and medium shots is probably the hardest thing to sell. So that's why Bill, at all costs, invested in this technology. Traditionally, flying sequences would involve wire work over green screens where actors have no reference for their digital environment. However, these walls really help because we had a ton of A-list talent that had, let's say, 4 hours with you because the other 2 hours were hair and makeup. So they needed to come in, see what they were doing. It really improved the camera work as well, because instead of not really knowing the shot, like the camera, the actor's performance, even if backgrounds, as you can see here, were kind of in a sense replaced between ICVFX and VFX, it just made the camera work more natural and the actor's performance more natural. So the second LED wall workflow was in Los Angeles at Eyeline Studios. This is before they were acquired by Netflix, where we captured real-time interactive scenes in Unreal Engine, and they had a big like J-shaped stage. And And we did more of our interactive in-camera visual effects tests there. So, for example, we would have some scenes where he's walking through a desert and his movement, or he's got like a Mars track or something, and triggering different explosions or lighting cues as he's moving. And I think something else to point out in all of this as well is, from a visual effects standpoint, being able to get client approvals from the director in camera, that's pretty awesome. So really looking at the method to Bill's madness here, all of these techniques, the centralized editing pipeline, the non-destructive asset pipeline, being able to get these approvals for, the timing of hits, the look of hits, how things were going with the director, meant that when they left set and the shots went to post-production, his coordinating team had clear notes if any changes, and if there were no changes, they could go straight to final, and that was pretty cool. The third LED wall workflow there was also at Island Studios in LA, and it was actually, the pictures make it hard to kind of see this, but like a big 360 orb kind of rig. So it's 360-degree video volumetric capture. But they took like this meta stage concept to the next level, and instead of using green screen, they actually had like the same LED panels as their LED stage, all the way around the talent. This might be a better example of it, but so this allowed us to capture really high resolution performances that could be seamlessly turned into digidoubles. So what we're doing here is not only capturing like what looks like a photographic performance, but this is turned into a kind of already rigged, like true performance, like 3D asset with a perfectly photoreal texture map applied to it. And the sickest thing about it is that this 3D capture method, from a cinematography standpoint, enables you to have unrestricted virtual camera movement around the character in post-production. So imagine the VFX supervisor being able to like just capture this performance and then in post choose what the nuanced camera move is over, under, around this photoreal performance of the character. This, I would say, is like a technology that's accessible to a high budget tentpole film. I cannot wait till that's available to independent filmmakers. But just knowing conceptually how they were doing that for any indie filmmakers out here, it can just let your thoughts churn about how to really use volumetric capture and photogrammetry to enhance performances for your next like space film or whatever you're doing. But the point is that the consistency across each of these LED workflows was hyper critical. We needed to make sure that all of the work between LA and Georgia would produce the correct expected results. And that meant that we had to have an airtight color management pipeline. And that began with the content. Even before you get to stage to calibrate and profile an LED wall, the virtual production supervisor will kind of go through these pre-calibration considerations, looking at the creative for the show and what kind of content is going to be on these walls. And they'll come up with delivery specifications for any facility or artists that are going to deliver content. But I just think it's a really important connection point between creative and technical parts of your brain, that like creative decisions here really matter. For example, you might want a higher dynamic range if you're going to have explosions or highlights or like sunlight on the wall, those kinds of considerations. On Black Adam, we did establish an ACES high dynamic range color workflow at each of the stages that we were on. And the setting, our main setting on the show was the DCI P3, PQ 10,000, 65D as our kind of baseline. And this informed our calibration and the profiling of each wall, the test content that we used. When you were going into this process, you got to make sure that your test content makes sense in that color space and gamut, and that you're using all the right materials. And I had originally planned to walk through all these steps with you, but we have 30 minutes. So I'm just going to go through the framework slowly like this. And I'm going to skip to the teamwork. So I've written a manuscript. I wrote like a big paper because I want to publish my work on this that's actually highly detailed. So happy to share that with people if they're interested in seeing the framework. I'm also working with Cinti RAS to, help get a lot of that framework out and published this year. So it's coming. But to hit on the teamwork, I wanted everyone to kind of see it in a graph because it's a really hard thing to talk about. Every project is different. Like Camille, it was myself and like maybe 3 VAD artists, and we could just kind of like scale up when we needed to. On Black Adam, I was a client-side virtual production supervisor that was hired by production, which is an important like thing to note from a legal perspective. If you're setting up a project, it's ideal, I think, to have your creative department heads like serving the production and the director's vision in like a non-biased kind of way. You can do it both ways working with a facility, but it just sort of depends on the legal setup or the needs that you have around managing other facilities and vendors. But we needed to have that role on this because our virtual production content creators were also final visual effects vendors. And as you can see here, I tried to kind of show this. The visual effects supervisor and I like managed almost the same team, but through a different lens. And then the real separate part for me were like the stage ops teams and specialists in my department. Okay, so Fallout, the juicy stuff. As the head of the virtual production department for Fallout, I shaped the team's creative process, designed workflows, managed budgets and schedules, and ensured effective communication throughout the prep and production phases. I coordinated strategies with department heads, collaborated with the showrunner and director to align our technical approaches with their creative vision, and worked with Magnopus's director of virtual production to ensure the continuity between blocks 1 of shooting and 2, because there are about 4 months in between both of those blocks of shooting. So once our team was mobilized by the production designer, because they always need to kind of get in there and design the show first, that's really important, we began building environments, and then we could pull in our visualization team and turn storyboards into real-time experiences through Unreal Engine. This phase also initiated the design of the color workflow, ensuring that by the time the director of photography was brought on board, a comprehensive plan was in place to incorporate their input. The techniques implemented established best practices for the show, laying groundwork for the team on Block 2, and then they actually still continue to influence how they're shooting season 2, like next week. The artistic vision for Fallout Block 1 focused on the post-apocalyptic, retro-futuristic world above ground, as well as like the underground vaults. And for these episodes, our creative team focused on making environments that really blurred the line between practical sets and virtual backdrops using a combination of 3D and 2.5D techniques. And it was so cool in this project because the director is also a writer, and the writing team had been kind of working with Magnopus through Westworld. They were exposed to the technology. They were all on board to have an actual virtual production department on with them. And so they really wrote the technology into the script. So it wasn't just a technical tool, but it was an extension of the story. And so, it was just really cool to work that way, emphasizing the contrast between like the luxurious vaults and the harsh wasteland outside. So in the opening episode, the wedding scene plays a key role in setting the tone for the entire series. We use the LED wall to project like a vast horizon over several different kind of times of day, like daytime sunset, nighttime, film burn, like standby screen, metallic walls, the reverse side of Steiner, and I don't know, something else. But there are a lot of setups in that one space. But the choice to use this as an extended horizon sort of was like a projected view of the dweller's sense of reality. And it really brought this scene to life because at the end of the wedding, there's this huge massacre sequence with the Raiders. Spoiler alert. But somebody shoots the projector and then it instigates this huge film burn, and we created a huge Houdini effect film burn, which is kind of an insane process for in-camera visual effects. Like, simulating on a deadline was really hard. But it turned out to really work well with the story. And it enhanced the show's analog feel because we were also capturing the series on film entirely. So because the project was shot on film, viewing the footage with accurate color representation to match the look anticipated in dailies was way more complex than usual. So I created a digital reference camera workflow, as well as a custom setup within our own machine room in our digital LED wall ecosystem to maximize the control of the color management pipeline at several stages. One of the things, it's easier to kind of linearize gamma and exposure in these workflows, and creating a measurable change in color, because it's usually sort of logarithmic, makes it more challenging. But we attempted to kind of combat this a little bit. So just as kind of like a opener to this idea of film versus digital, film camera captures images by exposing photographic film to light, which responds logarithmically to varying light intensities. And a digital camera converts light into electronic signal, and actually uses a log encoding to mimic film's response. But to take that a bit further, the film is going to have like a chemical response to all of these different factors as well. So although there are video assist options like this little doodad here that you can use on film cameras, they're basically like a beam splitter that split the light from the camera's like viewfinder diopter, which is cool because it means like, yeah, the whole crew can see what you're doing on cue take, but for a VP soup, a camera department, and lighting, where we're actually integrating physical and virtual set pieces to a live comp, it's not quite accurate enough, because not only did we want to see what it could look like in, like, as the film stock itself, but we needed to be able to view it as the film stock with the dailies LED applied, because when you're integrating elements for compositing, like shifts and contrast and stuff like that will maybe pop out like an element that you're trying to make look like it's fitting in. So you just want to have eyes on all those details. So the DIT had a really thorough understanding of the spectral sensitivity and density of Kodak Vision 3 500T 5219 film, who had worked with the DP on past projects. So they were really tight and had a good subjective understanding of what they were expecting from the film itself, and then what they wanted from dailies. So he built 2 viewing LUTs for us to use in our digital reference camera system. One was that sort of Vision 3 5219 film stock as it would look transcoded through like a Rec 709 gamut. And then the second major look was the proposed film dailies look as it would be seen through that Rec 709 gamut. But I wanted to say here that we ended up using the test days to help refine how we were using the LUTs, and kind of like dialing in those, to kind of go back before we would apply these magical viewing LUTs. Obviously, we had to take time to calibrate the wall itself, the digital ecosystem, make sure that the camera sensor was integrated into that workflow as well. And then we would start matching the film stock and the expectations of film into that. So that's kind of where these 2 LUTs played in after we had achieved that step. To establish a consistent foundation for the technical calibration, we set true north values for color space, gamut, tone mapping, scene linear mapping, and bit depth. And on this, because we had some limitations with our 2D playback, some of our playback software, we didn't have an engineer from that company that could fix the plugin to allow us to use open color IO. So we ended up for like working within a wider DCI-P3 gamut, but some of our content playback did have to be Rec 709. And from experience that didn't change the quality that we got, but we had to be aware of what our content gamut was in so that we could make sure that as we were picking the white point and neutralizing the wall and understanding our exposure latitude, we knew how to raise and lower the nit value of the wall. But this is also just a place where I want to say, like, a unique part of my pipeline was integrating live grade into 2 key areas for more control of color management. So, like, assuming you've got all your true north down and you know that you've got a correct look in the correct color space, you want to get creative and you want to be able to measure your settings. And I feel like live grade is a great intuitive tool. So the first place that was important was actually being able to control the color settings of the LED wall on the processors themselves to, like, be able to neutralize the wall even further. And then the second place was using live grade just kind of on the DIT cart as we received the digital footage, so we could kind of look at and adjust the like viewing LUTs that we wanted to easily, or just make sure that we were getting what we expected. On block 1, I tended to be a little bit more controlled about color manipulation on the wall because we had so many components going on. We were building the machine room. We were commissioning the wall. We had a lot going on. So I kept it very simple, and we kept the RGB values of the wall the same, relied on nit value and color temperature and more measurable notes for the wall itself, and did the live grade with the camera. Whereas on block 2, once they upgraded and got a virtual volume DP working with the DIT, they got a little bit more creative with it. And I've heard great feedback that they loved having the live grade on the wall. And that's kind of how they're pushing things through season 2 this time. So this is just like what I said before. SDR didn't really affect us too much, but I thought this was a cool, I'm a slide ahead. I thought this was a cool example because I think a lot of times people are like, what is it like to not know if the wall's calibrated? You can go in quite a loop chasing yourself if you don't understand all of the areas in the system where, like, you could have a color mismatch. So at least for yourself, when you're working with the stage, get to know your processor settings, the content delivery specs. Like, this photo could mean that the content was delivered in the wrong color space, or it can mean that there's something wrong with a setting in your playback software. It could mean that, like, a couple different things. So, ultimately you want to be able to see everything's matching. But when you get a result like this, you got to go through your own protocol of, like, what hasn't been checked off the list. And I know I'm probably close to being out of time here, but I'll just kind of go through these last points. When you're using film, you got to make sure you're synchronized. You're applying this crazy analog mechanical technology to a digital ecosystem. These aren't 100% perfect, but what they do is essentially take the mechanical mechanism of the film gate and try to sync it as closely as possible with the frequency of the wall. So it does actually help prevent roll bars and just different things that you might not see while you're shooting. So good to have those. We use the Red Spy Stipe system. And a fun anecdote here was that we had a single frustrum show. Jonah loves working with 5 cameras. So being a more expensive show, we had the ability to buy enough spy can trackers to sync all 5 cameras to the wall. And I want to share this because it's these little things, it's these user experiences that make directors excited about the technology. By going out of our way and setting the tech up like this, it meant that we could say, hey, you've only got one frustrum, but you let us know if you want it on camera A, camera B, camera C. You set up for a multicam shoot and we'll just follow your lead. So by the time they're pointing at a camera, we can go and, like, change it really fast. And a director loves seeing you change things fast. So that's all positive. Lens calibration, we had to calibrate. We lens mapped and calibrated the distortion for anamorphic lenses. Unfortunately, right now, I'm noticing in our industry that a lot of people are choosing to monetize and not open source, their process for lens calibration mapping for anamorphic lenses. So I'm doing my best with the influence that I have to kind of bring these practices back to open source, because I think they need to be. But you essentially can use a software to create a lens map that can be inserted into Unreal Engine. And that's essentially what we did. And because we had a killer engineering team, we could refine that and customize that for ourselves. And because I was kind of in that scenario, like a DP, a volume DP, I was able to visually understand whether we were hitting the mark or not for that distortion. And the final thing, I'm going to have to cut my presentation probably short anyway, that I wanted to talk about was just moire, because it's such a interesting thing with the introduction of film into an ecosystem. The film itself doesn't produce moire, but it possesses a unique quality in that its grain structure varies randomly from frame to frame, making it anisotropic, meaning that it does not follow a fixed pattern. But once you capture the images, basically that random grain pattern becomes resolved. And so it means that you don't have moire in the film stock itself, or like in the capture, but as soon as you display it on a digital display, there's a chance for moire. So if that happens to you, the nice thing is that you can use like Nuke or Adobe After Effects or Resolve to use a resampling kernel to try to smooth that out. But another thing that is possible technically would be like if you didn't follow the same rules as digital cinematography as far as like focus plane, you might actually capture the pattern of the LED wall. So my advice would be, follow the same rules about focus distance off the LED wall to avoid capturing an LED pattern. But then again, it wouldn't be moire in the film itself. You might discover that through a monitor later. So it's just sort of interesting thing to think about. And this whole theory was actually discovered by production designers working with film, where they would have these really textured patterns that would be captured on film. And then for some reason, like it would just show up as moire, like on a digital display. So we can use those same learnings here. And whether the DP realized it or not, the choice to use 4 per 35 millimeter film with anamorphics was actually a pretty cool choice. I was geeking out the whole time because essentially, like you can see here, using 4 perf means you have more vertical space in the frame, and anamorphics use actually more of the vertical space because of how it's shooting a compressed image. So when you uncompress that, it actually creates a higher resolution image. And in a sense, because it's creating sort of this higher resolution using more of the film itself, it's another way to avoid moire. So that's sort of like a weird tie-in, but I thought that was really cool. This is just a visual of kind of what our team looked like. The overview is that it was a team primarily composed of like engineers with artistic sensibilities. So it was a totally different skill set. None of these professionals had ever been on a film set before. And they were able to translate from my pre-production team, like doing kind of visual effects style and like VR and virtual scouting workflows, on becoming my on-set team. They did an incredible job. But it's that trust and communication that you build through that prep process that really anchors you with the other creative department heads, with the director, with the team. We were seen as artists and just like another part of that living ecosystem of the project. And it's really important for the success of a project. So I'm going to leave on this note, even though, so bear with me because it's kind of like a departure, but we're coming full circle. From that perspective, though, that I've learned through all of these experiences and now finally getting to Fallout, where engineering and agile workflows are so important, I would just say from looking to the future, the impact of machine learning and Gen AI on these existing virtual production tool sets aren't really quite fully realized. And something that I'm experiencing being able to self-teach with these tools is that independent filmmakers from now on can also be self-taught computer scientists and engineers. We can build our own tools to help improve the user experience of these tools for ourselves if we're like building a VCam system in our house, or if we're supporting a client. So just really fascinating that now through the use of these tools, like even engineering is more accessible and might be another characteristic that we're seeing coming out of independent filmmaking. So thank you so much for letting me go over a little bit, but that's the presentation. Thank you.